March 24th, 1944. Stalag Luft, WWII, German-occupied Poland. At 10 p.m., a man climbed down a ladder into darkness. Behind him, more than 70 others waited their turn. They had been digging for over a year, 3 tunnels, 10 meters deep, more than 100 meters long. The prison was designed specifically to prevent escape, built by Hitler's orders to hold prisoners of war who had already tried to escape before. The most escape-proof prison in Nazi Germany. Microphones buried in the ground to detect digging sounds. Guard towers surrounding the compound. Barracks raised on stilts so any tunnel entrance would be immediately visible. And yet, 76 men would crawl through that tunnel tonight. How do you dig 3 tunnels under a prison designed to detect tunnels? How do you hide thousands of tons of sand? And how do you coordinate 200 prisoners without a single spy discovering your plan? This is the story of the Great Escape, the largest prison break in World War II history. In 1943, the Second World War was at its peak, the biggest armed conflict in history. 6 years of fighting. Germany, led by Hitler, had invaded most of Europe. They were arresting many soldiers who were considered prisoners of war. Concentration camps were constantly being established to house these prisoners. The majority of prisoners were always trying to escape. Most of their attempts were successful because they were not in real prisons, just concentration camps made of military barracks. No cement buildings with cells and iron bars. So many prisoners escaped, but in the end, most were arrested again. The Germans, under Hitler's instructions, built more professional detention camps, specifically designed to prevent escape. They put prisoners who had tried to escape before in these camps. The most famous was called Stalag Luft III. This prison camp was designed in a way that made escape impossible. It consisted of military barracks placed on sturdy stilts, raised from the ground by cement pillars. Almost impossible to dig an underground tunnel because it would be exposed immediately. Moreover, the soil in the prison was very soft, closer to sand. If you tried to dig a hole, it would most likely collapse quickly. Besides, there were microphones planted in the ground to detect any possible digging sound. The detention camp was surrounded by 2 fences reinforced with barbed wire, watchtowers where security guards monitored the place 24 hours a day. It was almost impossible for anyone to escape from this prison. But there was a man in this camp, a prisoner who not only had enough will and determination to break out at any cost, he also planned to escape with hundreds of prisoners. His name was Roger Bushell. Roger Bushell was one of the British Air Force pilots during the war. He took off on a mission in France against Germany, but his plane was shot down. He used his parachute to get out before it fell. Then he was arrested by German forces. This man, whenever he was put in a camp, used to escape, then get arrested again. He was able to escape more than once. However, one escape attempt had caused him more problems than others. He escaped with one of his colleagues while being transported by train. His colleague was a soldier from Czechoslovakia. Their goal was to go to Czechoslovakia and hide there. Czechoslovakia at that time was under German occupation. When they reached there, Roger and his friend were able to find shelter. A local family took care of them, kept hiding them from German soldiers. The problem was that at that time, one of the biggest German commanders was assassinated in Czechoslovakia. The German army started a wide search campaign, arresting everyone they suspected, or executing them immediately. When the soldiers started to search the area, Roger and his friend decided to leave, so they wouldn't expose the family to danger. But this escape didn't last long. They were caught immediately. Although Roger and his friend never admitted the family or the people who helped them, neighbors had apparently informed on them. The German soldiers executed all members of that family. This caused Roger trauma, prompted him to hold grudges and hatred against the Nazis more than ever before. He had a strong desire to destroy the German regime by any means possible. The problem was that the Germans put him in Stalag Luft 3, the most fortified prison among all prisons. However, this didn't stop Roger from trying to escape. As soon as he arrived, he started thinking about how he could get out. First, he started making relationships with other prisoners, getting to know them. Then he formed a special team, a small group of prisoners, maybe 5 or 6. This team's task was to smuggle as many prisoners as possible from the prison. Roger's main goal was to destabilize German power. The escape of hundreds of enemy soldiers inside occupied territories would lead to the dispersion of German forces. Most of these soldiers were experienced and of high ranks. The Germans would fear that these soldiers would cause trouble. Their strength, instead of being concentrated on the front lines, would be distracted to deal with the calamity happening inside. The goal was clear. Only a meticulous plan was left to execute. The only way they had was to dig a tunnel. But the problem was the fortifications, the security procedures, the fact that digging was the most expected method. Guards were always looking for any possible tunnels. Here came Roger's smart idea. Instead of digging one tunnel, they would dig 3 tunnels in different places in the prison. The idea was this: if the guards discovered one tunnel, they most likely wouldn't think there were other tunnels being dug at the same time. The problem was that the guards were not ordinary guards. They were special forces soldiers dubbed the Mongols, here by Hitler's orders, trained in a special way, experienced in dealing with prison camps and discovering escape attempts. This was their specialty. The command council, Roger Bushell and his friends, were facing a very difficult opponent. Confidentiality of this operation was their highest priority. The first thing they decided was to name the tunnels by ordinary people's names. The first tunnel was called Tom, the second, Dick, the third, Harry. When they talked to each other about the tunnels, they used these names. For example, they would say, "We will go to Harry at night," or "Tom is in a good mood," or "How is Dick doing?" Their conversations became encrypted. If someone heard them, they wouldn't understand they were talking about tunnels. Especially since one of the main strategies used by guards was to plant a spy among the prisoners, someone who pretends to be a prisoner but is actually a guard's informant. Usually new detainees or transfers from another prison. The old prisoners had a smart strategy to identify the spies. When a new prisoner arrived, they would sit and talk to him, ask how he was arrested and where he came from. For example, if he said, "I'm from London," the prisoners would bring one of the old prisoners they trusted who was also from London. This old prisoner would start asking the new one about London, its weather, its people, the places, where he used to live exactly. Questions that no one could answer unless he was really from London. It was almost like a friendly interview. If they discovered a person was a spy, they would inform the guards, tell them they knew this person was not a real soldier, that he was one of their informants. Then they gave them a choice, either take him out of that place, or they wouldn't be able to guarantee his safety. This strategy always worked. This was essential for the plan. Roger wanted to smuggle hundreds of prisoners. He had to make sure there were no spies among them. Imagine, this prison camp was housing about 600 prisoners. Roger wanted to smuggle at least 200. Managing a huge escape operation like this was incredibly difficult. Roger and his friends in the command council were the only ones who knew the details of the plan. As for the prisoners who participated, each group knew only what they needed. They did not know everything about the plan. One group only knew about the tunnel, Harry. Another group only knew about Dick. Another group only knew about Tom. A fourth group's task was to provide the equipment. A fifth group was in charge of getting rid of the dirt. Each prisoner had a mission, knew nothing else but his mission. For their movements to remain secret, the command council knew they had to create a special spy network. A network that monitors the guards, knows their places and movements at all times. They spread a group of prisoners in different places, strategic places that allowed them to focus on monitoring the guards. For example, if they had a specific site they were working on and didn't want the guards to see it, when a guard approached a certain distance, one of the prisoners turned his cap on his head. The prisoner in the second position saw it and began to stretch. The third saw this and began scratching his arm. In this way, each prisoner who was monitoring the guards transmitted a signal to the prisoner after him. These movements were encrypted messages sent to the place they didn't want the guards to see. So they could stop what they were doing immediately, whether digging, getting rid of dirt, or making equipment. The smartest part was that none of these prisoners knew about the others, or what the signal they transmitted meant. Now let's focus on the digging process itself. The first problem was the softness of the ground. The soil was closer to sand. These tunnels needed support so as not to collapse. The solution was to extract wooden boards from the prison's beds. But how would they place them in the tunnel? Where would they get hammers and iron nails? Wait, they wouldn't be able to use hammers even if they had them. The sounds would be loud, high probability of being detected by the microphones planted underground. So they had to invent a smart engineering system. They cut these boards and made them look like cubes that attached to each other. If they gathered these pieces, they would reinforce each other, brace the tunnel, prevent collapse. However, they had to be very careful. Just a simple movement would make all the pieces fall. Another question, how did they cut these wooden boards? The prisoners had gramophones in their cells, old record players. They were allowed to play music. These recorders had a metal spring inside. If you took it out and made it straight, it would be very strong and sharp, like a saw. These are the tools the prisoners used to cut the wooden boards from their beds. After all the tools were at their disposition, all that was left was to keep digging. But these tunnels had to be very deep. If close to the surface, the microphones would detect the digging sound. Imagine digging tunnels about 10 meters deep. Difficult but necessary. They had to make sure they were far from the microphones. After they reached this depth, they had to dig toward the outside, cross the prison walls, dig as far as possible so the tunnel exit would be in the forest among the trees. These tunnels might need to be extended to 100 meters or more. Can you imagine how difficult it is to dig this distance in these conditions, with these tools? What made it even harder was that they had to dig 3 tunnels with the same standards. Fortunately, having many prisoners involved helped. The next problem was the sand itself. They had to get rid of it without attracting suspicion. The prisoners used to take the sand in bags, put them in their pants, go out and throw them in the vegetable gardens they had in prison. But the most important thing was the entrances of the tunnels. They were only known by the command council and the prisoners responsible for digging. These entrances had to remain secret. If discovered, the whole plan would fail. So, where were the entrances? The prison huts were raised from the ground, placed on cement pillars. The ground was seen by everyone. How could they dig without making the tunnel entrances visible? The tunnel entrances were in the cement pillars themselves. These pillars were used to extend underground waterways and power lines. Some pillars were bigger than others, depending on the size of extensions. The first entrance was for Harry, under a heating stove in one of the huts. Each hut had a heating stove placed on top of a ceramic plate. Because the stove was made of metal and hot, it couldn't be on top of the hut's wooden ground. The nice coincidence was that the stove was placed directly on top of one of the cement pillars. The prisoners lifted the stove with the ceramic plate, started digging below the cement pillar. The entrance cover was the stove itself. The guards weren't going to suspect the stove. They were the ones who placed it there. The second tunnel, Dick, was in a shower drain. They dug directly through this drain. One of the members was a smart engineer. He was able to make cement from dirt and simple materials. Cement that looked like the floor of the drain. He made a cement tile to the exact size of the hole they opened. Originally, a carefully drilled square hole. A very smart entrance. The third entrance was for Tom, also under a heating stove in another hut. But this entrance wasn't on a ceramic plate. It was on a cement plate. When the prisoners tried to lift the stove, this plate started to crack. Most of the stoves weren't under cement pillars. They needed to dig in these pillars to hide the entrance. So, what did the engineer do? He made a new cement plate to put under this stove, reinforced it with a wooden frame. Even if the guards saw it, they wouldn't suspect it. The prisoners were able to lift the stove while it was working. Some would go down to work on the tunnel. The ones above would close the entrance behind them. The stove looked normal, without any suspicion. This situation remained for several months. Everything was going well in the 3 tunnels. But one day, the guards were making a routine inspection tour. They entered the hut where Tom's entrance was, under the stove, under the cement plate made by the engineer. By chance, one of the guards was carrying a stick. This stick fell from his hand next to the stove on the cement plate. The stick hit the cement very hard, made it crumble a little bit. The guard went down to see what that was. He alerted the other guard. They moved the stove from its place, discovered Tom's entrance. The hut was evacuated. They planted explosives along the tunnel, blew it up. This is when the great benefit of Roger's original idea appeared. Digging 3 tunnels instead of 1. When the Germans saw the great effort put into building Tom's tunnel, they didn't think there might be 2 other tunnels of the same complexity being dug in other places. They immediately assumed all the effort, work, and equipment were put into this tunnel. They blew up. Instead of tightening surveillance, they became more relieved. So the prisoners were happy about this. However, another problem appeared. The Germans decided to expand the prison camp from the side where Dick's tunnel was being dug. This expansion ruined the exit they were hoping to reach. They were hoping Dick's tunnel would go from under the walls to the nearby forest. However, due to the expansion, the Germans started cutting down many trees from that side. Well, now Dick's tunnel was not an option anymore. So, the command council decided to stop working on it, focus all efforts on the last tunnel. Harry? They decided to use Dick's tunnel as a space to get rid of the soil they extracted from Harry. All work and effort were on Harry. This was supposed to speed up the process. The first thing they did was install the ventilation system. The prisoners extended a ventilation pipe made of milk cans. They attached these cans and extended them along the tunnel. To pump the air, they used bags, made something like a primitive machine, several bags placed at the beginning of the tunnel. A person would work on pumping air from these bags to the pipe. The second thing was the transportation system. The prisoners built a railway, put a trolley or wooden cart on top of it. They used this system to transport the diggers and move the dirt through the tunnel, because the more they dug, the longer the tunnel increased. The tunnel was relatively narrow. Moving inside was difficult. If the diggers kept removing dirt and crawling along it, the tunnel would never be finished. The final length would reach more than 100 meters. This railway system was essential for them to work quickly. The third thing was the lighting system. The prisoners made a lighting system by stealing electric cables from workers in the prison. The workers didn't tell the guards the cables were stolen because they knew they would be punished. The prisoners used these cables, stole some lamps from different places, connected the cables with the prison's electrical system. They made an excellent lighting system that extended all along the tunnel. Literally, we are talking about great work and planning. This is what happens when you are surrounded by an experienced team. Even with simple resources, you can achieve great things. Now the work on the tunnel was almost over. They had to prepare for what came after the escape. They began to make forged identities and documents. They had professional forgers of official documents on the team. These forgers began to create new papers and identities for all the prisoners getting ready to escape. So, when they went out, they would be able to ride trains without any problem. But one thing hindered them: pictures. Official documents require pictures. Their photos were in the prison administration, The guards were the only ones who could get these photos. The prisoners resorted to blackmailing the guards. Some prisoners were skilled at pickpocketing. They would go after a guard and take a card key or anything important from him. Then a second prisoner would come and say, "My friend, I heard you lost your card." The guard would say, "Yes, that's right. How did you know? Do you know where it is?" The prisoner would tell him, "Look, we know that if we tell the commander you lost your card, he will send you to the front lines, won't he?" The guard would say, "No, please do not tell him, please." The prisoner would say, "Don't be afraid, calm down. We just want a few simple things from you." Then they would ask for pictures or a stamp or any other things that might help them forge documents. The guard wouldn't think much about it. In the end, these pictures and seals wouldn't let them out of prison. So he turned a blind eye in exchange for not being exposed and sent to the front lines. In this way, the prisoners obtained everything they needed to complete the forging. Finally, in March 1944, after more than a year of planning and continuous work, the tunnel was completed. Everything was ready to implement the escape plan. All they needed now was the appropriate opportunity, especially in terms of weather. They did not want to go out on a night when the moon was full. They were hoping for a rainy night, but it didn't rain. So they focused on going out on a night at the beginning of the lunar cycle, when the moonlight would be as little as possible. On March 24th, 1944, the command council decided this was the night. All the prisoners planning to escape had to leave their huts. Head to hut 1 of 4, the hut under which Harry's tunnel was located. The command council had a list of these prisoners, checking everyone who entered. This operation was being carried out slowly. Not all the prisoners came directly. They came in groups, so as not to arouse suspicion. The prisoners began to descend one by one from the tunnel, crawl through until they reached the end. But at the end of the tunnel, in reality, there was no exit. Roger decided they would not dig the exit until the moment of escape, because if they opened the exit hatch early, one of the guards might notice it. So they decided they wouldn't open the exit until the night of the escape. The prisoners on the front lines reached the end of the tunnel, dug to the top, placed a ladder there. But at the top, a bad surprise was waiting. They discovered their calculations were wrong. The opening of the tunnel did not reach the trees of the forest. They were outside of the prison, but the place they were in was open, only about 50 meters away from the prison fence and watchtowers. High probability that if they came out of this exit, armed guards would see them and shoot immediately. The members of the command council who were at the front decided to complete the escape. There was no time or opportunity to back out. The prisoners started to come out of the tunnel one after another. The process was very slow. Many problems that night. There was a power outage which darkened the tunnel. Part of the tunnel collapsed and took time to repair. Several unexpected things happened. The process of extracting prisoners took from 10 p.m. until 5 a.m. At 5 o'clock, the sun began to rise. Prisoners were still coming out of the tunnel. Until 5 in the morning, 76 prisoners emerged from this tunnel, spread out in different directions into the forest. After 5 o'clock, 3 additional prisoners also came out, but these 3 were noticed by the guards. They moved with their weapons to besiege the tunnel opening. The last 3 prisoners raised their hands, surrendered, were arrested again. As for the rest who were following them in the tunnel, they tried to retreat inside the prison after learning the plan had been exposed. In the end, out of the 200 prisoners who were planning to escape, only 76 had made it. But 76 is still a large number. Unfortunately, despite this, most of these prisoners were arrested within less than 72 hours. Most of them were only a few kilometers away from the prison. Some prisoners were able to escape completely, return to their countries, participate in the war. But the rest were not so lucky, including Roger Bushell himself. Roger tried to board one of the trains using his fake identity. But soldiers discovered him due to the strict inspection procedures after the escape operation. They managed to arrest him. Prisoners of war, according to the international treaties, are supposed to be treated humanely. They may be punished sometimes, but no one expects them to be executed. Even these prisoners, when they escaped or tried to escape before, weren't executed. They were transferred to a stronger prison. The problem is that this time they escaped from the strongest prison. So Hitler himself was very angry about what had happened. The first thing that came to his mind was to execute all the prisoners, strip all the guards and commanders of their positions. But in the end, his aides convinced him to only execute 50. The 50 that were caught after they escaped. Hitler himself supervised their execution. To this extent, he was angry about what these prisoners had done. Although the end was not as happy as what the prisoners had hoped for, at least Roger's plan succeeded in its goal. It dispersed the focus of German forces. Many of their forces and efforts were directed toward dealing with this huge escape operation. The distraction plan succeeded, and Roger Bushell died in relief, because he knew that the goal of his plan was finally achieved. Remember the question from the beginning? How do you dig 3 tunnels under a prison designed to detect tunnels? The answer is teamwork, ingenuity, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. 3 tunnels, Tom, Dick, and Harry, 10 meters deep, 100 meters long, built with wooden boards cut from beds, ventilation systems made from milk cans, railways, electric lighting. 200 prisoners working in secret, encrypted signals, forged documents, blackmailed guards. 76 men crawling through the darkness, the largest prison break in World War II history. Roger Bushell and the men of Stalag Luft III. They proved that even the most escape-proof prison can be beaten. If you have enough determination and enough friends willing to dig. And that brings us to the end of our story. If you like it, do not forget to like and subscribe and activate the bell button so that you can receive new videos.